generations ago. Lua, the Golden Hall.
You understand what this means, Preceptor?
Ballas stood menacingly over the little man, his golden silk robe glistening in the pale blue light of Orokin's statuary. Though his words would perhaps not seem threatening to a casual listener, Preceptor Morin could feel the void-black doom in them well enough.
Of course, Lord Ballas. This was only a third-generation prototype, so there will be room for...
I'm not here to listen to the excuses of an overgrown pupa, Preceptor. I'm here to remind you that the Seven, and I, eagerly await news of your success. And soon. You, of all people, should remember just how much I love to reward those who serve me with alacrity and good news.
Despite the smile that played across his face, these words from Ballas could only serve to underline the reality behind them, for Ballas was even more fond of rewarding failure, and woe betide any who offer him disappointment.
I understand, Lord Ballas. We will refine the strain and bring you an exceptional result.
Morin stood as tall as his limited stature would permit and puffed out his chest in an attempt to appear unfazed and confident. He couldn't tell if Ballas saw right through the act, but he didn't intend to offer the Orokin any further disappointment at this meeting, and hastily scurried off, back to the labs and back to his purpose. Ballas watched the little preceptor's retreat as the smile faded and turned into a dark scowl. Morin couldn't hear the smash of the Orokin's fist against the statue of Lord Tully, first head of biological manipulation. He couldn't hear the venom in the executor's voice.
Cursed servants! They cannot be trusted to do anything as I desire. I shall be watching you very closely this time, Morin.
Lua, Undercity of Tobruk. Even as she rounded the corner, she could hear her pursuers were gaining. She knew the alleys and passages better than anyone, so she was certain she would be able to shake them if she could get to the bridge. She knew right where to plunge into the artificial river to reach the little tunnel. There was no way those big golden soldiers would be able to follow her there. That armor was much too heavy for swimming.
There, the bridge. Just a few more seconds.
She urged her weary legs to run faster. They were almost upon her. She could hardly catch her breath, but it was so close. She just needed to take a big gulp of air and hold it in for 15 seconds.
That's all I need,
she thought. And then she saw them. Premier Vostok himself had come in pursuit this time, and he was waiting for her on the bridge, quiet and serene, with his usual pleasant facade, flanked by a pair of his personal guards. Her head spun as she realized he was between her and where she would need a jump, and there was no way she could hold her breath that long if she dove from here. Her pace slowed. She gasped for breath. She could feel tears of frustration beginning to flow. She had come so far only to be stopped here. Was there nothing at all to be done?
Think, there's got to be a way out of this.
My dear Saphir,
began the Premier.
All of this is completely unnecessary. We have given unto you food and a home and a family and even a future. Surely you must understand that I am endeavoring to give you a better life than you've had in these slums. The Order only wishes to help you. You have so much potential.
Stop!
Interjected the girl. Still gasping for breath, she tried to collect herself for the confrontation. The soldiers running up behind her slowed and stopped as they reached the bridge, not expecting to see a member of the Order of the Void, let alone one of the 3 premiers. At a nod from their sergeant, the soldiers quickly formed a cordon around the end of the bridge to prevent their quarry from slipping back the way she had come.
You just want to use me. I don't care about my ability. I never wanted it. And I never wanted you to help me. Just leave me alone. I don't want to go back. Why can't you understand?
Premier Vostok shook his head.
I wish you would understand. This is for your own good. Guards, if you would.
Without a reply, his men began to advance. Saphir looked quickly between those behind her, closing their cordon, and the two approaching from in front. She was out of time and almost out of options.
I think I've caught my breath enough to hold it for a swim. I have to try. I'm not going back with them.
Bracing herself and trying to take the deepest breath she could, she waited as the guards drew near, and after a quick feint to the right, she ducked left under the grasp of the bulky soldier closest to the railing. With one last deep breath, she plunged into the cold, dark water as Vostok's angry shrieks echoed overhead. She swam against the current, hoping it wouldn't carry her past the tunnel in safety. She hadn't really caught her breath enough before the jump, and she could already feel her lungs burning, silently screaming for air. It was so far, so much further to go. She realized she couldn't fight the current much longer, and she hadn't calculated on its speed carrying her so forcefully away from where she needed to go. Still she struggled, still she held her breath, calling upon the last reserves of her failing determination. She was almost there now, just a little further and she would be free. She gasped reflexively. A surge of pain overwhelmed her and forced her breath out of her lungs. She now fought the reflex to refill her burning, empty lungs. Her hands caught onto a stone as she tried to pull herself toward the tunnel entrance. She reached out to grasp the tunnel's rim, only inches away now. And suddenly all was despair. The stone she was gripping came loose, pulled from its rest by the force of her movement against the current. Those last few inches quickly grew. She was past resisting anymore, and felt her lungs' defiance as her will buckled.
Is this the end?
She thought it would be more painful, but she felt strangely numb. She hardly noticed the hand that grabbed her own and quickly pulled her into the tunnel. It didn't matter anymore. She had done everything she could and failed. The world and all her senses spiraled into darkness. Lua, Undercity of Tobruk, several hours later. Saphir's head was still spinning when she felt awareness returning. She was cold and it felt as though every cell in her body was being bathed in hot plasma. But for the pain, she was certain she was very dead. Gasping for air and spewing a bit of water out at the same time, she started to become aware of her surroundings. Vaguely, stone walls carved into the lunar crust. Becoming more adjusted to the dim light, trickling around a bend in the passage some distance away, she tried to pull herself up into a sitting position. Suddenly she froze. There to one side was something. A figure hunched in the shadows. She couldn't make it out. It wasn't moving, though she felt like she watched it for hours with her breath quiet and shallow. Some castaway Orokin statue, perhaps? Feeling a little more at ease, she continued to survey her situation. She could hear the water now, trickling along the course of the passage. The air was musty, but not quite foul. An Orokin aqueduct, then. With her wits returning from the fog, she remembered where she had been prior to this awakening. Yes, this was the tunnel she had been trying to reach, part of the vast, artificial water distribution system the Orokin and their servants had constructed in an attempt to irrigate the surface of Earth's moon. Their vast terraforming prowess, which had turned places like Venus and Mars into somewhat inhabitable dominions of their empire, had never really been able to overcome Lua's inherently low gravity, meaning it could only support a minimal atmosphere no matter what they tried. Then came the epiphany. If the moon was too light, why not make it heavier? And for an Orokin, what better weight to add than gold? And thus their explorers and miners were set to work, vast, cloned hives of slave workers sent to asteroids, comets, and planetary bodies in an effort to scour them of all their golden riches. For decades, their servant armies toiled, generations of them extinguished in service to mad ambition and greed. Slowly, their Grineer miners dug down into the heart of Lua, while legions of artisans and metalsmiths cast monumental architecture in orbital molds, forming massive spires of golden brilliance in honor of the mighty empire and its deathless masters. They had turned the moon itself into the largest, most opulent palace, a gargantuan golden hall, and the new seat of Orokin power. The aqueducts remained, coursing synthetic water throughout the halls, filling basins and fountains, and in some places where its flow stagnated, congealing into peculiar, glowing, tree-like growths, like some sort of living ice. In this aqueduct, Saphir had found such a place, and the glow she could see a short distance away was probably from that place, a twisted, shining beacon in the darkness like the roots of a great tree. It had cracked through the wall, revealing an empty chamber where she had taken hiding away in her younger days, and even had stored up some food rations and gear. Shakily, she rose to her feet and started off toward the light and hope. She couldn't understand what had happened. Wasn't she being swept away from the tunnel before? How did she get here? Her head filled with questions that she couldn't answer. She took another look at the statue, and from this angle, the lighting was better able to reveal its appearance. Not stone, not gold, but steel? She moved closer. Pale, silver steel, like the blade of her little dagger, flanked by deep blue. Not a particularly elegant statue, she reasoned to herself. Steep angles, protrusions that looked like blades along the arms. Vaguely human in shape, but hardly a realistic rendition. She wondered what artist could have thought this was worth creating, then reminded herself it had clearly been discarded or abandoned here. Maybe its craftsman had realized he was wasting his time. Curiously, though, there was something written on the front of the shoulder, next to what would have seemed like an armor plate on a soldier. Orokin script.
What a peculiar thing to find on a thrown-away statue.
Saphir could read Orokin script, thanks to Premier Vostok's teaching. He had insisted that she would be better able to hone her gifts and serve the Orokin if she could write and read. Perhaps she could become an Archimedean in time. Squinting in the low light to make out the faint lettering, she leaned close, leaning with one hand on the statue and the other cupped next to her face to block out some of the light pollution streaming from behind her. She could just make out one word. Talon. Her eyes widened. The statue creaked, and its head slowly turned toward her. Saphir was almost frozen with cold horror, for this could only be one thing. An Orokin metal beast. Mindless creatures their scientists had created to launch into battle as violent weapons fixated on destruction, used without a thought for their safety and disposed of once the fight had ended. They were uncontrollable, unpredictable, and deadly, and only the Orokin possessed the means to destroy them. And now this terrifying creature was right here, before her eyes, staring her down, its blade-like armor suddenly gaining an air of menace and doom in her eyes. She couldn't run. Not anymore. Her strength was long gone. She was hurting, weak, hungry, cold, and hopeless. She fell to her knees as a beast rose to its feet and began to approach. She could feel tears begin to flow again, unable to flee as the metallic creature reached toward her. She could feel the cold, heartless metal of its embrace. It uttered not a sound. It simply held her in its arms, like her father had so long ago, like the last time she had ever seen him. In a moment, her fear began to subside. She could feel such strength in those arms, but not malice, not willful destruction, not a mindless beast. Talon held Saphir in its arms, and Saphir began to weep.